oldest friends. We've known each other since the age of 11. Forgive, forget, move on. It's not like you have forever in life.
They looked like the perfect pair. Two kids from Queens who shared a dream and conquered the world. But while their voices blended perfectly on record, their real lives were a mess of secrets and silent treatment. Why did the world's most famous duo spend 60 years refusing to look each other in the eye? There is an unsettling side to their success that most fans never saw coming. This is the hidden story of the most toxic friendship in music history. And it all begins with a betrayal so deep that even success can't bury. The reunion that couldn't heal the past. In 1981, over 500,000 people flooded Central Park to witness a reunion they thought was impossible. Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel were finally back on stage together after years of silence. The energy in the park was electric. Some fans cried, while others cheered because, to them, this was not just a concert. It was two old friends finally putting the past behind them. Well, that's the version of the story we all know. We love the idea of these two kids from Queens who grew up to make magic together. For a long time, the world bought into that image because it was a beautiful story. But the truth is, things weren't what they seemed. When you look closer, you realize something was off. Even on that big night in Central Park, things were tense backstage. There were reports of awkward silences and cold shoulders. Yes, they stood right next to each other on stage, but they felt miles apart. It was obvious these weren't two best friends hanging out. They were two people who used to be close, sharing a stage only because the world demanded it. Of course, the music still sounded perfect, and for the fans, it felt like nothing had changed. But if you paid close attention, you could feel the distance and see that the friendship was gone. You see, it's easy to stand on a stage to sing and perform hit songs for a few hours, but that doesn't mean they've forgiven each other. So, it might look like a reunion to fans, but in reality, they were just two strangers who happened to know the same songs. So, how did we get here? How did the voices of a generation end up side by side, yet worlds apart? We have to go back to the very first betrayal. It all began on a street corner in Queens. The two kids from Queens. The story of Simon and Garfunkel didn't start in a studio, but on the streets of Queens in 1953. Simon was only 11 when he first saw Garfunkel performing at a school talent show. But it was a sixth-grade production of Alice in Wonderland that really cemented their bond. Playing the White Rabbit and the Cheshire Cat, the two boys discovered they were both obsessed with rock music. Music came naturally to both of them, but in very different ways. Simon was focused on writing. Even as a kid, he paid attention to lyrics, structure, and how a song should feel. Garfunkel, on the other hand, had a voice that stood out right away. It was smooth, clear, and full of emotion. Without even planning it, their roles began to take shape on their own. Simon created the songs, and Garfunkel became the voice that brought them to life. Then they started a small brand called the Peptones, a neighborhood group where they spent hours obsessing over how to blend their voices into a single, perfect sound. And by 1957, the 15-year-old duo took a leap of faith. They pooled $25 to record Hey Schoolgirl at a studio in Manhattan. A local promoter, Sid Prosen, happened to overhear them and signed them to his label under the name Tom and Jerry. The song became a surprise hit, moving over 100,000 units and landing the teenagers a spot on American Bandstand. It was an intoxicating taste of the spotlight, and for the first time in a long time, they realized they can actually be a big shot in the music world. But here is where the first crack in this friendship started. And honestly, it happened way earlier than most people think. Back in 1958, while Simon and Garfunkel were still going by the name Tom and Jerry, something happened that changed how they saw each other. Without saying a word, Simon went into the studio and recorded a solo song under the name True Taylor. Now, he didn't record that for fun. He actually put it out, almost like he was testing what life would look like without Garfunkel. When Garfunkel found out, he didn't take it lightly. He felt betrayed. This made it clear that Simon was already thinking beyond the partnership, even if he never said it out loud. And the thing is, they did not sit down and talk it through or clear. They just kept going like nothing happened. But you could tell this was the origin of their feud, because once trust is broken, it does not just fix itself overnight. It didn't end there. Those early days, things were not perfectly aligned. Simon was the kind of person who stayed locked in on music, always thinking about what came next. Garfunkel had the talent, but his attention was not always fixed on the same path. He was more focused on school and other interests. Maybe he wasn't giving his all to music because he felt he needed a backup plan after the True Taylor betrayal. Even though they were close, their priorities were shifting. This started creating tension. They would come together, drift apart, and then somehow find their way back again. Back then, it felt normal, just two young guys trying to figure life out. But as time went on, the distance became more real. Eventually, they both moved on to college. For a while, it looked like music had taken a back seat, and their story as a duo was over. But they eventually found their way back to each other and decided to give music another shot. They worked on an album together, hoping to finally get their breakthrough. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned, and the album flopped. It was frustrating. Feeling stuck and unsure, Simon decided to move to London, hoping for a fresh start. But then, just when it felt like their story was quietly coming to an end, something happened that changed everything. While Simon was away trying to start over, something unexpected was building back home. The truth is, neither of them saw it coming. The duo was about to become famous, but they were about to find out that success is the quickest way to destroy a friendship. The sound that changed everything. Now, back in the 60s, Tom Wilson, a producer, heard their track, The Sound of Silence, playing on the radio, and felt it was too thin to stand out. So, without telling Simon and Garfunkel, he decided to give it a full makeover. He took the original acoustic version, brought in studio musicians, layered in electric guitars and drums, and turned the folk song into something more rock-inspired, making it harder to ignore. Well, it worked because the song did not just climb the charts, it went viral. By the time Paul Simon found out, everything had already changed. While he was still playing small clubs in London, a song he didn't know had been changed, had turned him into a star back home. But here's the thing, when Simon first heard the remix, he was horrified. He thought it sounded messy and awkward, but the public disagreed. The song reached #1 on January 1st, 1966, and remained on the Billboard Top 100 for a good 14 weeks. Suddenly, Simon and Garfunkel were famous. Just like that, the two were pulled back together. It was the big break they had always prayed for, but it came with a challenge. They were now known for a version of a song they did not even create themselves. This kind of success sometimes comes with pressure, whether you are ready for it or not. Regardless, they tried to ride the wave of fame. In October 1966, they released their third album, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. It marked a major turning point in their career. The album stayed on the Billboard charts for almost 3 years and sold over 3 million copies. For the first time, they used an 8-track recording system. This allowed them to layer their vocals more cleanly, without Paul Simon's guitar interfering with the sound during recording. But as they became more famous, something else quietly slipped in. And no, this time it wasn't about the songs. It was about how they looked standing next to each other. You see, Simon was around 5'3", and that was something he never really ignored. Meanwhile, Garfunkel stood tall at about 6 feet, with a look that naturally drew attention. So every photo, every interview, every time they stood side by side, it created this silent tension. To fans, they looked like the perfect duo. But for Simon, he always feels intimidated. And honestly, Garfunkel didn't make it easier. Years later, he admitted that he first became friends with Simon out of pity because of his height. And back then, he would joke about it too, saying no matter what happens, he would always be taller. It might sound like harmless teasing, but comments like that bruised Simon's ego. Before long, things started to feel different in the studio. Simon was the one writing the songs. Every word, every line, and every idea started with him. He was not just creating music, he was shaping the entire direction. Naturally, he wanted control. On the other side, Garfunkel was the voice people connected with. He gave the songs emotion and made people feel them. But he was not the one writing them. Slowly, this difference started to stand out more than it should have. Fans started comparing both of them, and slowly jealousy started creeping in. Some claim Simon is the pillar of the duo. Others claim it was Garfunkel with the magical voice. At first, they didn't let any of the comparisons get to them, but it didn't stay that way forever. To the fans, nothing had changed. They still looked like a perfect pair, two voices blending into one. But behind the scenes, things were starting to take a turn. Paul Simon was becoming more focused and more intense, always chasing that perfect sound like a perfectionist. He was trying to control the music because he couldn't control how the world saw him standing next to Garfunkel. Meanwhile, Garfunkel began to feel like his role was getting sidelined. The distance between them started to grow. Conversations became shorter, and most moments felt awkward. They were still in the same room, still making music, but something was clearly off. You could feel it, even if they never said it out loud. It seems the same success that brought them back together was also pulling them apart. The bigger they became, the clearer it was that they did not want the same things anymore. It leaves you with a tough question. When a song becomes something special, who really gets the credit? The person who created it, or the one who made you feel it? For Simon and Garfunkel, this question was not just a thought. It was the beginning of everything falling apart. And just as they hit their peak, an offer from Hollywood arrived that would finally snap the bond in two. One was stepping into the spotlight. The other was being left in the shadows. Control, credit, and silent resentment. As they continued to make more hit songs, that shared success started to feel uneven. It was not like they were arguing in public or making a scene on stage. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. But behind closed doors, the balance between Simon and Garfunkel was changing. Simon was no longer just the songwriter. He was taking full control like a boss. He decided how the lyrics should sound, how the melodies should move, and even how small details in the music should feel. He was building the entire structure of each song, while Garfunkel stepped in at the end to deliver the final voice. From a creative angle, one might say Simon had a reason to lead. He had the vision, and he knew exactly what he wanted. But in a partnership, this kind of control creates problems. Garfunkel was not just there to sing. His voice was a major reason why their music connected with people. The songs were powerful because of the writing, but they worked because of how he brought them to life. As Simon's influence grew, Garfunkel began to feel like he was losing his place in something that was supposed to belong to both of them. Still, the tension did not show up as a public drama. It showed up in long silences during studio sessions and in moments where decisions were made without Garfunkel even being consulted. It started to feel like one person was driving, while the other was just along for the ride. From Simon's side, he likely felt he needed to take charge to protect the quality of the music. From Garfunkel's side, it felt like he was fading out of his own group. Over time, they stopped talking about what really mattered. What once felt natural now felt forced. Deep down, both of them were keeping score. Simon likely felt the success came from his pen, while Garfunkel felt it came from his voice. The truth is, they were both right, but neither was willing to say it out loud. Then, right when things were already tense, Garfunkel made a decision that changed everything. He stepped away from music to pursue acting just when they were in the process of recording an album. He landed a role in the movie Catch-22, which meant leaving for months to shoot on location. At first, it looked like an opportunity, but the timing was disastrous. For Simon, this felt like a betrayal. He was deep in the creative process for their most important project yet, and his partner was far away on a movie set. Recording sessions were delayed, plans were scrapped, and Simon was left to carry the weight alone. It no longer felt like a shared mission. When Garfunkel finally returned, the trust was gone, and Simon couldn't help but resent him. He didn't see an artist exploring a new path. He saw a partner who walked away when things got serious. Sometimes, it is not one big fight that breaks a bond. It is timing, distance, and things left unsaid. They were no longer moving in the same direction. The partnership had turned into pressure. Yet, here is the most surprising part. Their biggest success was still ahead of them. But by the time the world heard it, the bond between Simon and Garfunkel had already reached its breaking point. The masterpiece that defined a generation was actually the final nail in the coffin for the duo. The album that ended it all. In 1970, Bridge Over Troubled Water was not just another record release. It was a cultural moment. It was the kind of album that seemed to be everywhere at once. The songs dominated the radio, the awards piled up, and the world was completely locked in. From the outside, it looked like everything Simon and Garfunkel touched turned to gold. But if you could step inside the studio during that time, the story would feel very different. The perfect harmony people heard did not match what was happening behind closed doors. The sound was smooth, but the relationship was under serious strain, even if nobody said it out loud. Because of this, the way they made the album changed completely. This was no longer two people working side by side. It became fragmented, separate recording sessions, separate decisions. Sometimes, they were not even in the same building when major choices were made. That early feeling of being in sync was gone. The part that still surprises people is that none of this tension is obvious in the music. In fact, it sounds like the opposite. The album feels unified, almost too perfect. The songs carry themes of connection and emotional support, even while the people singing them were barely communicating. This contrast is clearest on the title track, Bridge Over Troubled Water. It is a song built on comfort and loyalty, the idea of being there for someone no matter what. It became their most iconic work, but internally, it carried a complicated weight. Paul Simon wrote it, while Art Garfunkel delivered the lead vocal that defined it for the world. When it became a global hit, Garfunkel was the one in the spotlight, receiving applause for a masterpiece Simon had spent a sleepless night creating. Simon couldn't shake off the emotion he felt at that moment. Not because the song failed, but because even at their peak, the question of credit and ownership lingered. It was never just about success. It was about who the world believed that success belonged to. And somehow this question quietly widened the gap between them. In 1983, after spending years apart, the duo tried to come back together for a new album titled Think Too Much. Fans loved the idea, and it felt like they were trying to prove they still had that same magic. But once they got into the studio, things quickly fell apart. The tension was still there, and this time, it was louder than ever. The sessions became uncomfortable. Arguments replaced conversations, and just when you think things couldn't get worse, Simon made a decision that shocked even the people closest to them. He took the master recordings and removed Garfunkel's vocals completely. And it did not stop there. Simon went ahead and released the project as a solo album called Hearts and Bones. For Garfunkel, this was more than just a disagreement. It felt like being erased from a story he helped build. It sent a very clear message, whether Simon meant it that way or not. The partnership was no longer equal, and it was obvious their bond had broken for good. Yes, they could still come together once in a while and sing the old songs. But the trust that held everything together in the beginning was gone. In the end, there was no dramatic breakup or public fallout, just a silent split. In 1970, at the very height of their success, they walked away from each other. Their magnus opus did not come from a strong partnership. It came from a fractured one that managed to sound perfectly united on record. The friendship and partnership were over, and both men were finally free. But as they stepped into their solo lives, they discovered a cold reality that they had to live with forever. Life after the split. Success with shadows. When the split finally happened for Simon and Garfunkel, it did not come with nasty headlines. In fact, to this day, no one can point to the exact breaking point. That is why, when you ask most fans what exactly happened between them, no one can give you clear answers. But this does not mean things were going smoothly. What followed was a decades-long musical Cold War. It was a silent battle fought through solo albums and press interviews. For Paul Simon, stepping away felt like breathing room. He could finally work without waiting on anyone else. There were no compromises, no delays, and no splitting creative decisions. He used that space fully. He moved across styles, from gospel sounds to reggae influences, and later reshaped his career again with Graceland. Success followed him everywhere, and some fans claim it was easy to read it as proof that he had been the main force all along. But even with all the achievements, something was never fully left behind. No matter how strong his solo work became, people still heard what they thought was missing. It was not in a harsh way, but just in that silent comparison that never really goes away. They were still listening for that second voice, the one that used to sit underneath everything. Even in his biggest songs, there was always that faint sense that something familiar should come in at any moment, but it never did. It was the first sign that in this Cold War, even the victor was haunted by what he had lost. For Garfunkel, the battle played out differently. He stayed active, took on acting roles, and remained visible in the public eye. But the way people talked about him never really changed. He was often reduced in the conversation to the voice behind the songs, while Paul was seen as the writer and driving force. And then by the early 90s, things got even more tense. During a run of shows in New York in 1993, the situation backstage was so bad that people around them started to worry. Not just about arguments, but about things getting out of hand. Simon's manager later admitted the atmosphere was so tense and hostile that he feared things would have turned violent if a knife were present. It was that intense. Over time, their Cold War moved into the media. In interviews, Paul Simon would sometimes downplay what Art Garfunkel brought to the duo, talking more about his own writing and direction. In a shocking 2015 interview with The Telegraph, Garfunkel finally let the mask slip completely. He called Simon a monster and a jerk. He admitted that he only befriended Simon in the first place out of pity for his height. These weren't just words, they were grenades. That interview effectively killed any remaining hope for a reunion. For the next decade, the silence between them was deafening. What makes it even more interesting is that they were both trying to prove the same point from opposite sides. Simon was trying to show he could succeed completely on his own, without needing the duo at all. Garfunkel was trying to make it clear that he was never just a background piece in someone else's vision. He was a full part of what they created together. But a partnership like theirs does not really disappear cleanly. Even after it ends, it lingers. It followed them into new careers and into how people talked about them. Now and then, they found their way back onto the same stage, most famously at the 1981 Central Park concert. But behind the scenes, the Cold War was still raging. There were reports of disagreements about how things should be done, how the set should flow, and even what came after that night. The idea of turning it into something more did not last long. It faded almost as quickly as it appeared. What stayed consistent was not a restored bond, but the tension that surrounded it. And that is really what defines everything after the split. It was not full separation, and it was not a real reunion either. It was something in between. They kept moving forward as individuals, but the world never stopped linking them back to each other. In the end, music gave them everything it was supposed to give, including fame, recognition, and legacy. But it also made sure they never fully stepped out of each other's orbit. They built a legacy on being together, only to realize they were trapped by it. But as the years turned into decades, one final question remained. Was the music worth the cost of the friendship? The sound of forgiveness. It has been decades since Simon and Garfunkel last stood together as a working duo, but their music has stayed with us. People still play the records, the lyrics still connect. And when you hear those songs today, they sound just as clear as they did back then. Over the years, they picked up 10 Grammy Awards and earned a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Bridge Over Troubled Water went on to become one of the best-selling albums ever. But when people talk about them, they usually do not start with awards or numbers. They start with how the music made them feel. Their songs did more than just play in the background. They showed up in real moments. Late nights when your mind would not slow down. Long drives where you had too much time to think. And silent mornings that felt heavier than usual. The sound of silence felt like it understood something you could not explain. And Bridge Over Troubled Water felt like comfort at the exact moment you needed it. That is what resonated with people. It always felt personal, like the songs were speaking directly to you. Today, Simon and Garfunkel are both in their 80s, living quiet lives in New York, just a few miles apart. For years, the silence between them became part of their story. You could hear it in interviews, in the way they spoke about each other, and sometimes in what they chose not to say at all. For a long time, it felt like that distance was not going to change. But then, in late 2024, something unexpected happened. They met again, not for a concert or a public moment, just for lunch. Garfunkel later shared that there were tears and that he admitted where he had been unfair and where things had gone too far. Simon responded in a way that allowed the conversation to move forward, instead of getting stuck in the past. They did not focus on the business side of things. They went back to where it all started. Back to Queens. Back to being kids before everything became complicated. In that moment, something shifted between them. It was not perfect, and it did not erase everything, but it changed the tone of their story. When you step back and look at it now, their legacy is not just about the music they left behind. It is also about the fact that, after all those years, they found a way to speak again. They spent so much of their career creating songs about connection, understanding, and reaching across distance. In the end, they found a way to do that for themselves. So when you listen to their music now, it feels a little different. The harmonies still sound the same, still smooth and effortless. But now, you know everything behind their success and growth. The years of silence, the distance, and the fact that they still came back to the table. Maybe that is what stays with you. Not just the success, and not even the misunderstandings, but the timing of it all. The fact that it almost came too late, but didn't. As you listen to their music today, knowing the decades of silence and the final tearful reunion they shared, does the music sound different to you? And if the world's most famous rivals can find a way to forgive each other after 60 years, what's stopping you from making that phone call? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. For more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.